And we're back. And I actually had to redo this recording due to failing to actually start the recording when I did this mission the first time.
Yeah, and good morning, everyone. I'm a little under the weather right now, so if I'm a little trippy or odd sounding, that's what's going on. So we'll see how that pans out. And this looks like it'll be a bit of a um, glitchy episode in general. Who knows?
Yes, I actually encounter a glitch I've never seen before.
Yeah, I do. It looks like they're just hanging out and chatting there. You walk up to them with your shotgun out. It's so mean.
Especially because they're all being mind controlled.
Yeah, that's that too.
Okay, so here's essentially what I have to do. Uh, there's a bunch of these guys who are really high level, and they are all carrying notes. And that's me doing a backflip to back up. And essentially, I gotta plant C4 and kill them, and then steal their stuff.
I do like how it apparently their notes are all written in English. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's actually kind of weird because I'm replaying some of the Romania stuff, and all their
yeah,
stuff is written in Romanian.
no, yeah, they really do make you try and read Romanian. I mean,
Uh,
once they get at the end, they just. I remember there came a point in this game where I just stopped looking up solution, like stopped trying, and started just looking up the solutions just from the word go.
I think it might be because they had access to someone who could, do Romanian and not someone who could do Arabic.
Yeah,
Now, the problem is after a certain point, the C4 will despawn, so you kind of have to plant it right in front of them. And I can't get too close to them because that aggroes them.
sort of moseying around.
Mm-hmm. And then just put the pieces of the note together.
Quick access inventory updated.
And now there has been a recurring, like, roaming encounter of high level dudes escorting a prisoner, and they'll pretty much just ignore you, even if you're the
Local
same
bounty
level.
detected. Initiating.
But what you're supposed to do is C4 them like the other guys.
And off it goes.
Yep, just give me a wave and run away.
Quick access inventory updated.
And now we're gonna go do a stealth section, and I hate stealth sections.
Yeah, I will admit, I still do like how even though maybe it gets better in Tokyo. Um, there I remember like later in the game, a
See,
lot of
I didn't
these
even think about it, but all of those guys are level 50, so I'm like, oh shit. They aggroed me, so I'll just let them kill me.
yeah, yeah, they're still putting in effort to string like to actually get keep the missions logical and flowing. But I don't does that I remember that cutting at like decreasing for the side missions in later levels and later like parts of the world. I don't know
I
if.
haven't seen anything so far. Like I said, I'm replaying Romania.
Oh, there you go. It has been a while. Like I never played Legends itself, so. And fun fact: that symbol, the one that we just missed, the one that has a bunch of little hands hanging out, um, that's based very closely on a real Atnist symbol. That was a bunch of little tiny hands radiating out of the sun.
And here's
Yeah.
the most annoying part of this mission is trying to get these people to run over the C4 because you cannot take them on their own. Because there is also a fucking camera here.
Well, and do you?
We
How
only
long
got
does it take to
seen.
respawn? To how long does it take to despawn?
I don't really remember.
So you just sit and wait,
Yep.
and that's why these missions suck. Well, actually, they suck for a bunch of reasons, but that's part of it.
I'm I'm very impressed with what they tried to do in an MMO.
Mhm.
They tried to do a lot of things that MMOs are really not designed for, and I think they mostly succeed. Yeah, they completely skipped it.
Mentally singing "Pop Goes the Weasel." You just wait and wait.
Hurry up and wait. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's like for.
Yeah, and the camera is unbearable. That's what makes it impossible.
Joke's on you, I still have the key card.
Yeah, you rematerialize because bees are demigods. Do whatever the fuck they want.
And that isn't totally true, and we'll see that when we get to Tokyo.
I mean, yeah, fair, but do they ever
It's a
go? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yep, I got spotted again. Yeah, just go ahead.
Um, I don't think they ever did the thing where they connect bees to like mythological figures. Usually if some like a mythological figure shows up, it's embedded in the lore of the area, or it has some kind of goal rather than being like a fun reference to somebody who may have been like you, unless it was
Difficulty
the
detected.
Nazis, because they don't.
Punctual.
They made the right choice keeping the Nazis in the background. Like we've already talked about it, but it's true.
And here I discover another piece of lore.
The Venetians, local secret world PMC.
PMC.
God, I was into Metal Gear a little bit in high school, but it never really stuck with me. It's one of those things where it's just like it got memed for me before I got into it, and that kept me from getting my head around it. And
The only
all I
Metal
could.
Gear, the only Metal Gear I've ever played is Metal Gear Solid 5, but I have seen all of the rest of it thanks to Chip Cheesem.
Yeah, I watched. This had to have been It had to have been 2008, I think. I watched MGS 1 and 2 on YouTube back like somebody had filmed all like had managed to tape all of the tape the wrong word record the whole gameplay, the whole game, all the cutscenes and everything. Back when YouTube had 20-minute time limits for its videos, so it was just like dozens of videos back to back, going through cutscene by cutscene, and that was awkward but workable.
And here I die a bunch of times.
Yeah. Oh, they've been zombified.
I get the feeling there's only like one real Atomist,
Yeah.
and he's basically just zombified everyone else.
Yeah. What was that? What was the name of that lore?
Breaks in time.
Oh, right. Yeah, we'll be getting to those later.
In this video, actually.
Yeah, I think this is the point in the game where I started giving up on side missions. So, like, I was still doing them at this point, but I started skipping ones that were out of the way. So we're gonna start seeing. There were a few missions I wasn't familiar with. Like, I didn't meet what's her face from Solomon Island in the mansion alone with the cats.
Mm-hmm.
Edmund or Ed like something her. But I met most everybody else. I but we're
Yeah, I didn't see the generator in the dates room.
we're about to hit stuff that I have never seen before and meet characters I've never seen because I remember that guy. I remember American pop culture cab driver guy.
And I've already been spotted, but I don't notice.
Oh, I can kind of picture you sighing.
Mm-hmm.
Just
There's a reason that when I replay missions, like to do stuff in this game, like to up my character's ability, um, to grind equipment, I don't replay the stealth missions. There are achievements in this game that I will never get because they require doing stealth missions in one go without being spotted.
that's always a That's always a really high bar to clear for any video game, especially one that's just stretching its engine to the limit like this game does with its like oddball missions.
Oh no, that's not even the best part. The best part is there's a cooldown, so you can't constantly grind missions.
Oh right,
That
so you
cooldown is 12 hours unless you are a patron, in which case it's 8.
so yeah, that sounds so yeah, this game has so many good features, so many like boneheaded features. Stuff that's like they didn't think everything through. You just got spotted, or
Nope.
did you manage? Oh, you managed to get past them.
And essentially what happens here is we go down this long hallway and walk right into a cell, and then they somehow notice we're in the cell and close the door on us. And then we get monologued at.
you know the secret of keeping bees? My people have been doing it for thousands of years. One does not build a royal palace for the honeybee. A hive of dung is better than a hive of stone. Far better that you remain a captive. A dead bee creates no honey. Not to mention your talents in that area. Aten has promised me immortality. With the Black Pharaoh gone, I stand first among his prophets. And all he asks in return is a little chaos. All good beekeepers know this trick. The smoke takes away your sting, makes you placid. You will recover in time. But I plan to put that time to good use. The hour approaches. When next
You're
we
near
meet,
that
my
thing.
friend, we shall stand as equals.
That's not true at all.
Yeah,
I
no.
can I can 100% state that having played all of this game, that is not true at all.
Yeah, like you don't do that. You don't.
You don't mean an
He
equal till you get to fucking Tokyo, okay?
yeah. Yeah.
And we don't have a gun, so say hello to
I
some
just
Indiana Jones action.
from the sound of it, have sex with them.
And here's a mission you can only get here.
Yeah, this is very lazy design. There's not like what's oh okay. I just noticed that you have like options on the hotkey bar.
I'm not using them because it's better to keep them stunned than go for the windup.
Yeah. It's in theory I like brought down to normal sections in games that give you a lot of powers, and just because they make you scramble. Like I am the only person in the world whose favorite Fallout New Vegas DLC is Honest Hearts, because of it really worked with that exact thing. Because you only got like I'm a guns person in Fallout games, always small guns, and they only gave you ammo for one kind of gun and only one kind of ammo. So you ended up having to fall back on skills you hadn't used and like start adapting to local conditions. And I loved it. It was great. But everybody else, like, I don't know. Everybody else likes the storylines of the other DLCs, which makes sense.
I've
But
never heard anyone say they like Lonesome Road.
yeah, I have, but I've never heard anyone say that they thought it was like their favorite or the best.
It's just no one likes being monologued at
Yeah.
for that whole area, and it's like, hey, I'm gonna tell you why you suck. It's for something you, the player, had no control over that happened in your character's backstory.
A lot of
By the
people.
way, my big gripe with how Bethesda runs Fallout is that things are being built again. I am obsessed with the apocalypse, I, the writer.
Yeah.
And then he got added as a sex pest, and that's why they destroyed everything he was working on in Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah. People don't, they tend to be controlling. That tends to be a good way of how you spot them. Well, I mean, not that anyone ever does. If it does in time to, yeah, I'm not gonna go into that. Looks like this guy isn't a zombie though.
Yeah, here's our big burly Indiana Jones boss fight. No, he's got the eyes.
And you just put on way too much mascara this morning.
He's been crying.
It's traumatizing him just as much as it is his victims. You know, like I'm willing to bet you know the story behind why Indiana Jones pulled his gun in that one fight.
Yes, Harrison Ford had like a
Yeah,
stomach prop bug, and
he,
he was just tired from filming, so he just pulled his gun and shot him, and the dude played along.
yeah, it made it into the end, made it into the final cut because he had the shits, he had the runs, and he had to go, so he just mimed shooting him and ran away.
So
Yeah,
where did we learn these UFC shit? Do you think the bees just imbue you with that knowledge?
I think it doesn't really matter. Like
My people.
same way that you don't have to really learn anything to start using like blood magic. You don't know any of the details around it. So I think you just pick that shit up.
You must find it.
It just feels right.
Must contain it. He will help you. Please, find him. He will know. Saeed will know. He knows how they think. But he is not like them. Trust Saeed. He will find you the time you need.
And we just leave him there.
Yep. Good allies. I remember doing things like where I would just. Looks like the super mobs are gone now. Do you remember doing
Yep.
things where I would just shortcut my way through these areas? I wouldn't even bother doing the teleportation menu thing. I'd just walk up to a strong enemy, die, and then respawn wherever I wanted to be.
And I die.
You know, why not? Oh, you just teleport back
And
for.
they don't respawn.
Oh, well, there you go.
So it's basically me just going, okay, just a long walk.
Dude, like how the moment his attention break, you went back just to.
I need to kill 7 guards.
Just this endless wave of these punching people. It's just.
Yeah. Like I said, I think they mostly succeed.
It makes the times that they fail all the more glaring. And tragic. I guess, usually it's better to aim high and fall than just fail. Unless that actually ends up, hurting you. And it didn't really hurt him, it just kind of sucked.
Well, you always learn from failure, even the worst failure.
Well, I mean,
Like,
no, you don't. You can't learn from death when you're dead.
well, that depends on whether you believe in the afterlife.
I mean, well, I guess you can learn but like, I'm not sure how useful it is if you're in like heaven to know not to do like know which turn not to take to not run off a cliff. You know, it's like
Sorry, I
yeah.
needed to do some stuff here. And now we get to meet Saeed. Saeed is the mummy we've been seeing.
We actually get to get missions from him and shit.
Mm-hmm.
Ghouls.
Yeah. Did you know?
Oh,
And, I have news for everyone. The rest of this video is a single mission.
Without us, they'll never acquire top caliber. So I told myself. Oh, sure, people have been known to get things done without me, but the work I did to sign, seal, and deliver the goods, it was downright artistic. Memories. Ugh. Let's not dwell on the past. No, I take that back. Let's dwell a while, shall we? No matter how much time goes by, you never forget the ones that got away. In my case, it was a divine little Roman thing. Came traipsing through here a millennium ago. Ah, to imagine what might have been.
millennium ago it would not have been
Temples,
Roman.
monuments, people, they all just bleed into each other. But the Ancile of Mars.
You might mean Roman as in Byzantine.
Not in
I know what
10,000.
you're thinking. Saeed,
On
after
1000.
all you've done for me, after all you've done for Egypt,
Yeah.
I'd be honored
Not
to get you the
at that
Ancile.
point they've been
If
like
only
on
I had
for about
time.
They still call
300
themselves
years.
Romans.
You did have time.
I mean, like the Byzantines themselves
If those
did,
Romans
but
were who I think they are, you'd be doing yourself a favor. Those are my terms. You dig up the Ancile for me, and I dig up information for you. I'm going to take this. Oh, and read the manual. I don't want you crawling back as a temporal anomaly.
so now we're yeah, what was it? Like I mean, yeah, it's conceivable that there was like a Byzantine visitor swinging by around 1000, but at that point Egypt had been firmly under Muslim control for like 300 years. It's, if ancient Egypt shows up in anything that's a cult, it's going to either have aliens or wizards. Or both in the case of like Yarlathotep.
Well, I was about to say, didn't Moses fight like Egypt's court wizards or something?
Yeah, he
Admittedly,
did.
my whole conception of that era is primarily 20-year-old memories of seeing that Disney cartoon.
Yeah, I was about to say most of what I remember is the Prince of Egypt. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's but to be fair, that's not the only time
You
that
need to go to temple more, dude.
look, man, I'm in the middle of another city doing an intense job where I don't know anybody. I'm busy. But he's just okay. So
Here we are, 100 AD, the city of Sol Invicticus. And we encounter a glitch here that makes me have to actually log out of my character and log back in.
Okay, so real quick, I'm gonna put a bow on that one. Just to be fair,
Oh, it's 329 AD.
329 AD is oh, that's right during the crisis of the 3rd century, or actually shortly before it, I think, which is a perfect time for this. But anyway, to put a bow on it, there, God's like Jewish prophets face off against priests and sorcerers several times in the Bible, and that's the famous one. But they also do it a few times later on in the Holy Land. And always, whoever they are, they do their hocus pocus. They maybe make something happen, and then the prophet in question does something, and they either die or go nuts or get embarrassed or pull their pants fall down. You see their dick or something just like whatever basically God flexes on them for like half a chapter, and that's how that works. So interesting. I wonder why they specifically chose 300-ish AD, because
So here's the thing that shovel is for. There is a way to get a piece of lore in this that is rather complicated. There is a body here in that city hidden away that is infected by the filth. You need a shovel and some embalming fluid, and then you need to bury it. And then when you come back to the future, you need to go to that same area, and a special zombie will appear that you kill and get the lore for mummies. Now, we can't exactly walk into that city dressed like we are.
yeah.
So let's just steal this dude's clothing.
Oh, of course, it's Sol Invictus. At some point, okay, this is actually this is like a good and bad time to talk about, because you have me on this LP to talk about lore. There's actually a lot of history to talk about here. So let me know when I can cut loose and when I like.
Just cut loose, because this is also a stealth mission.
Oh, well, yeah. Then fuck that. Okay. So let me wind up a bit and talk about polytheism as a rule. So I and how about we've talked about cultural Christianity before, about how like there are even people who are outright atheists and militant about it often think basically see things through the lens of Christianity. They just invert the parts they don't like. That's there's and in the world's monotheistic religions, there's usually a strong divide between like different levels of the divine. Like often there's a transcendent God that's above everything, and then there are malevolent forces or small scale natural forces. Like you can have demons, you can have ghosts, you can have local spirits, whatever. But there's a division of both type and scale that's going on there. Even all but like the wild, like very few theologians will tell you that Satan is on the same scale as God is. A few will, but all the others will call them Manichaeans and not invite them to parties. But like, that's a monotheism thing. Polytheistic societies, which are historically much more common, tend not to make that strong distinction. They have gods that are very often extremely powerful, sometimes to the point of being like everything. Like, because depending on who you ask, technically, Hinduism is monotheistic with the concept of Rama, but that's way more complicated than it sounds. Whatever. Anyway, I'm a little sick and a little rambly, so you're gonna have to live. God, where was I? Right. There's not a sharp divide between the divine and between levels of divine. A nature spirit that just like hangs out in a forest and bones people is ultimately a part of the same kind of being that a powerful god that smites people and guides civilizations is. They're wildly different in scale. They never interact. They never want to interact, but they're still not like there's a greater difference between them and a human than there is between them and each other. So even though those, like, you give the power scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that meant a lot of that meant cults. Like, and when you talk about the ancient world, when you talk about polytheistic societies, cults rarely refers to what we think of as a cult. Usually it refers to something that's official, like, or at least something that had like a formal structure. Often it had a priesthood, often it had families that had been practicing it for millennia, often it was connected to cultures, usually it was connected to subcultures, like specific areas or whatever. And they and also worth noting, there is no canon in polytheism as a rule. Like, you have holy books sometimes, but you don't have, like, in a society that's just internally disorganized, that doesn't have some kind of authority to impose cults. You don't have single overarching ones, and even then, if you had somebody who enforced it, they'd usually make a new one. Like, you know, I'm willing to bet you've heard of Dionysus and Aphrodite, and you probably
Yes, I've heard of both of them, and uh, to an extent.
yeah, Dionysus is a party guy. He's the god of wine, and he gets drunk. And Aphrodite's the god of sex and being hot, pretty much. And the thing is, both of those, the conceptions the way that we think of them today, are those are late Greek and early Roman. They were You go back a few hundred years before, like about 400 or 500 AD, and Dionysus was a god of death and rebirth and of madness and the divide between civilization and, like, the reason he's associated with wine is because it makes you behave strangely. It drives you mad. And he's it got the reason that we think of him, he's so tame. And also Aphrodite was a war goddess and was almost certainly imported from the Middle East, from Astarte, or if you've heard that name, like or Ishtar. And she was originally a war goddess as much as she was like a love goddess, and she got tamed after Alexander the Great took over the Middle East, and his descendants started trying to figure out how to rule it. So they basically kind of domesticated the cults and then put them in charge as, like, as ways that people could participate in, like, in courts, because the people who followed Alexander were just the most corrupt motherfuckers on the planet. They wanted to have the wildest parties possible. But okay, so that's why is the cuneiform? Oh yeah, worth
Quick
noting, at this
access
point
inventory
cuneiform had
updated.
not been used cuneiform had never been used in Egypt, and would not
Oops,
hadn't been.
accidentally turned off my disguise.
Oh, now you're gonna get stabbed. Wait, and that
But
looked like
rule
those looked
have
like pylons.
historical conservation.
Yeah. Oh,
It just boomerangs me back to the time tomb.
and then you have to start over again.
Yep.
But the fun part is, that those looked like pilum. Those spears.
Mm-hmm.
Those were throwing spears. They were in your average legionary, at least at the height of the Republic, height of the Empire. There was no divide between the Republic and Empire. I could get into that at some point, but um, they'd use that basically as skirmishing weapons. They'd form a shield line, and they'd throw these gigantic spears that were made out of soft iron, so they'd lodge in people's arms or their shields and then bend and pull them to the ground. Except that they didn't use pilum like that, like in melee combat. They had swords for that. So they probably would have used clubs or truncheons if they were just, like, hanging out and trying to enforce the peace somewhere. Whatever. Anyway, okay. So I got distracted. Let's go back to cults.
You were talking about how Alexander the Great's guys were the most corrupt motherfuckers.
They absolutely were. Well, not all of them. Like, there were people, but some of them were better than others. But it was very much a party culture. But and it was very much a culture where secrecy was okay. How do I put this? When the Greeks took over a huge swath of land, there were a small number of people ruling over ancient civilizations they were okay with being ruled by foreigners sometimes, but they weren't necessarily the biggest fans in the world. And they tried to handle this like some groups didn't, and their empires collapsed. Some groups, but usually they tried to strike a middle ground. They took whatever gods were vaguely similar to whatever gods were in the areas they took over, since there were a lot of Indo-European cultures that they conquered. They usually could find somebody they could identify them with, and then tried to get uh, local authorities to join those cults, and basically sold them as just different parts of the same overarching religious system. And it sort of worked. Like none of the Hellenistic states lasted all that long. Ultimately, none of them were that successful. Uh, by the time the Romans came through, most of them were really decayed. The Ptolemies, who were in charge of Egypt, were probably the most competent, but that's not saying that much. Because they
From
were,
what I've heard about the Ptolemies, it was most of what I hear about them is the incest.
yeah, it's the inbreeding. That was because they they took on aspects of local religion, which is something that like the Seleucids who controlled Persia and like Syria, most of Anatolia, they never even bothered. The Ptolemies tried to incorporate some local practices, but it didn't work really well, and they incorporated some of the worst local practices. That like the divine inbreeding thing was something they borrowed from the pharaohs, and it didn't do them any good. But yeah. Anyway, so like cults are associated with power, and religious belief is in like individual deities is associated with power. So, but that's at the height of the empire. That's like 100. We're talking between 1 and 100 AD ish. Fast forward a couple hundred years, and you're in 300s, and 300s started off with a dynasty called the Severans taking control of the throne. There were military emperors, and they produced some really really shitty emperors. Um, but and eventually they ended up getting over like the one competent emperor who came out of that line at the end, who wasn't the guy who founded it. He got killed when he was like 17 by one of his bodyguards who declared himself emperor. And that led a solid 50 years of constant civil war, constant invasions, and plagues called the Crisis of the Third Century. And by the end of the Crisis of the Third Century, like people sometimes say that Rome should have collapsed. Like the Mauryan dynasty in India collapsed at that time. The Han dynasty in China collapsed. Rome didn't. Rome was just barely able to hold itself together. But this was a very bad time for people. And this was a time when there were a lot of very powerful people moving through and getting killed. Like the average emperor in the Crisis of the Third Century ruled for about 2 years, for 50, and this took 50 years to work out. So there was a lot of there were a lot of religions that rose and fell, and there were a lot of in prominence and importance. There are a lot of groups that like had various levels of influence. There are a lot of cults that grew and collapsed. Um, by the way, I don't know if you've heard of Hadrian, the Roman emperor.
I've heard of Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah, Hadrian was the guy who ordered the wall built. He was famously he may have been Roman, but he just loved Greek culture so much. He was also like when I say he was gay, he had a boyfriend who fell off a boat and drowned while they were on their honeymoon cruise on the Nile, and he founded a cult to his boyfriend, Antinous, and that cult basically like a cult of youth and beauty, and that cult lasted like hundreds of years. Hadrian ruled about 120-ish AD, and that cult lasted long enough that early Christians ended up like co-opting bits of it and breaking the rest of it apart. But and it was very popular in Egypt because that's where it was founded. So okay,
Okay, here's just want to interrupt for a second. Here's where I start running into the glitch. The glitch is it won't let me make the thing. And I try a bunch of remedies, but eventually I have to actually log out of my character, log back into my character, and redo the mission. So, enjoy
So,
that.
yeah, great. Now I
Let's
can
go
say
back to
whatever
talking
I
about the
want.
crisis
Yeah.
of the third century.
Okay, so, Sol Invictus, who you saw there. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, the complicated thing talking about early Christianity in this period is that, there are a lot of modern Christians who have very specific ideas of what Christianity looks like or should look like. And then there's a historian's view of Christianity, which is very different. It's extremely different, and that can make people very mad. But you don't get a whole ton of militant Christians coming to something awful in the first place, let alone drilling all the way down to find this LP. So, um, like there were a lot of very similar cults in the area when Christianity was first coming into first like pulling itself together as a religion. Um, its big distinguishing trait in the early days wasn't even really theological, but it was a lack of secrecy. Most of these cults really wanted people to commit to them and to be maybe not to be exclusive, usually not to be exclusive, but to hide secrets to as a way of like building community, of building identity. And Christianity was tended to be very open and to have it tended to be open to the point where bishops would fight each other and not just constantly like denounce each other, but there are a couple of times where they actually punched each other out in public. But like so but it wasn't the only theologically that unique, at least at first. And there were several other religions that had aspects of a divine figure sacrificing themselves to redeem the world and redeem humanity or something. And Sol Invictus was one of those cults. It means literally the unconquerable sun. And it was sun worship. It was old fashioned, like Middle Eastern sun worship, hammered together and presented in a way that Roman elites across the empire could actually like get along with. And they did. And it was like it wasn't crazy popular, but it was around a lot. Um, right at the end of the okay, so people talk about throwing Christians to lions. That probably never happened, though they were sometimes. The funny thing about again, here's something I'm glad that there probably aren't the kind of Christians who are listening to this won't get mad, but there are Christians who would be. There are a lot of early martyrs in Christianity, and the thing about them is that the Romans hated martyring them unless they were like emperors who saw them as subversives, because they lived in a polytheistic society. To the Romans, you worship your gods. Everybody has different versions of the same gods. It's all part of the same overall continuum, and the refusing to honor somebody else's gods is an insult rather than like a outright rejection of their existence. Usually, they didn't know what to do with Christians, and Christians had a habit of because like and you had to as one of your duties as a citizen of Rome was to perform sacrifices to the cult of the divine emperor. Every like basically how the way this would work, and I'm cutting a lot of things short, is that after an emperor died, the Senate would vote on whether to deify him, and they'd basically perform if the vote went through, which it usually did. They would perform a procedure where they basically capture his ghost and work it into a network of other like dead spirits of dead emperors who are then given power through like sacrifices and veneration as divine protectors of the empire.
That is
So
absolutely has to be an SCP.
it is pretty. It's a very weird like this and this like this is when some people died. People did make cults about them. They called them hero cults, and there Hercules became a god because his hero cult was so old that it predated the formation of the Greek pantheon as we know it is as mythological as any other figure. Because like Hercules was like the every something I remember something like a quarter of all cities in the Roman Empire claimed some connection to Hercules. He was just something that they like somebody they all looked up to. And, yeah, you're just looking at this and going, but what? But I don't what? And yeah, but like so, and that basically you would try and take their. They believed in souls, like a lot of people do, but they also believed that you could, by worshiping those souls, you could turn them into local gods in a way. Because again, there's no divide between powerful gods and local spirits. You can just power them up through belief, which is a really cynical way of putting it that they wouldn't have used, but it's kind of what happened. And the Roman Senate was basically like took these would take use the priesthood that the state had at its disposal to turn dead emperors into assets for the empire as a matter of public policy, and it was seen as a matter of public policy and as a matter of like loyalty to the state, as it's in the way that you would see some measure of like national defense today almost. It was not. It wasn't. It wasn't even a religious thing really, because they didn't. They didn't have a. You know. They lived in a polytheistic society. Spirits were everywhere, and to them, that's part of how. It's just a practical way of maintaining the state. So Christians who refused to sacrifice to any god, who wasn't like just flat out that, like even the Romans worked out a deal with the Jews where the Jews would sacrifice to God in the emperor's name. Which basically, which was they were kind of like, well, it's going to the same place, so we can agree to disagree on the source. Christians would not sacrifice at all, and that was treason because it was directly undermining the forces that held the empire together. So they kind of had to order execution they had to order capital punishment for a capital crime. And there were a lot of times in the early empire where somebody would bring a Christian in on trial and the judge would just start grilling them and and when I say grilling, I mean I'm not like trying to insult them, but trying to force them to do anything. And the Christians would just push back, and eventually they just start insulting the judges personally until the judges ordered their deaths for clear treason. And then they'd be executed, and they'd get to be martyrs. So there was a lot of okay. So yeah, that anyway, I got derailed. So and that was something that was pretty much unique to Christians at the time. That was what was actually no, that's not true. There were a bunch of things that were unique about Christianity at the time, but like okay, long story short, Sol Invictus it had a lot in common theologically with Christianity, but its practitioners did very different things. And his practitioners did the standard sort of things that cultists did mostly, and it ended up dying out. The reason it's connected to Otanism is because they're vaguely similar. They came out of the same place roughly. They came out of yep. They came out of the same place roughly. They were both forms of sun worship, and they also didn't have like the cult of Sol Invictus did not have a strong like how do I put this? It didn't have as strong an emphasis on hierarchy as a lot of cults. And Otanism was later on. I'll talk about Otanism. Otanism was very egalitarian for something ancient Egypt came up with. So there's some similarity there. They're really not the same thing, but they're located close enough ish that the game was just kind of like, well, may as well. And that's how that got to there. But
Okay.
so like
I enjoyed hearing that. We're gonna hear more about it because
yeah,
you might want to brush up on your ancient Egypt because next mission is another time to mission, this time to ancient Egypt.
Do you know what era? Because that actually makes a big difference, or the year.
I am not aware. If they say anything, I will tell you after I record the next video, because it isn't in this video, but it'll be the next video we do.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, I'm actually not done talking about early Christianity, so that's fun.
Oh, that's something you can have a PhD in, okay,
Yeah,
dude? Like,
yeah. I mean, any of the topics
Quick
that I've brought
access
up, and then
inventory
it's gone.
updated.
Wait, I got off topic. People have built their entire careers discussing aspects of those. But like early
my
Christianity
favorite
was
is the
like,
Council of Nicaea, where someone gave a long denouncement speech that ended with his death because he was poisoned and literally shit so hard in the middle of his speech that his guts came out.
yeah, I think that was the one where somebody, they actually started brawling on the floor of the council when Arianism came up, and I don't
What
even
what
have
is
time to
what
talk about
is
it. What
I was about to ask. I've heard that before. I don't know what that is.
do you know? Okay, do you know? Have you ever heard the term Christology?
No.
Christology is the study of Jesus, or not the study of Christ specifically, and more specifically, it's the study of the nature of God on a very fundamental level, and the relationship of how is God related to Jesus, how much of it is divine, how much of it is human, and that
That
was for the first like 1,000 years or so of Christianity's existence. That was the hot budget topic. That was because people were still hammering. It took centuries to hammer that out, and could and did kill each other en masse over it. So,
I'm just trying to imagine someone trying to empirically determine that.
oh, they tried. Um, like if you've heard of the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that is a political compromise. It basically took. There are a bunch of different positions around this. It basically went, okay, so God can be both divine, like you can have the
Quick
divine
access
God and
inventory
human Son
updated.
that a lot of people liked, and you also have a Holy Spirit that's separate from both of them that intermediates, and that like that makes both of them part of the same thing.
Quick
Arianism
access
took the Holy
inventory
Spirit out of the
updated.
equation. It was put forward by a guy named Arius, who is actually based in Egypt. Egypt was really, really important in early Christianity. A lot of cults came from there. A lot of early theologians came there. The concept of a monastery was born in Egypt. Uh, like it was born out of people who would just wander out into the deserts and just hang out and live off of whatever they could find for decades and then die, just like as hermits to be one with God. And that eventually developed into the monastic system, though that took a long time. But and Coptic Christians are still like 10% of Egypt's population today. They still speak their descent. They still speak of relative of ancient Egyptian, and they have a pope in Alexandria. But okay, Arianism basically said there is a God, the God of the Old Testament, who is divine, and there is a Son, the Jesus, who isn't, who's touched by God, who's influenced by God, who's like more closely related to God than any other prophet, but they are not necessarily the same thing. And that was something that just drove a lot of theologians absolutely fucking wild. They hated it. They hated it. And that was Arianism is what sparked that fist fight I brought up. Um, it
So
was,
basically, it was someone going, "Well, I don't understand how there's a Holy Spirit, so why?"
I mean,
I mean, I
they
don't. To be fair, I don't understand that part either. I don't understand the Holy
well,
Spirit bit.
neither do I. I mean, like, 'cause I'm not exactly not exactly a Christian, so
I
I'm ever
was
a
raised
Trinitarian.
I was raised vaguely Christian, like Catholic school to a point, and then, well, not Catholic school, but Catholic churches to a point, and then various vague Protestant denominations. But I'm not Christian myself. I'm an atheist.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's there was a lot of actual thought and logic that went into this, but it's very esoteric and it's stuff that it's just like you it's you got to really care about it to wrap your head around it. Um, and Arianism is a lot simpler than Trinitarianism. Um, and there are a lot of even though the Trinitarians ended up winning out, because basically it was a compromise position that meant you could have a separate father and son, that one of which was divine, one of which was human, and to also have them both be divine at the same time, and have that even vaguely justified. So that was popular, and people wanted to have them both. Let's see, what's this?
Basically, he's gonna throw some mooks at us in monologue.
Oh, yeah.
It is disappointing to find you here running errands. You do not
That's
make good
lame.
use of the gifts you have been given.
And he made me lose my train of thought.
You are
What a
working
prick.
for the kingdom. What do you truly know of this man, this thing? He crawled from his tomb a man out of time. And did he improve the world? Did he take up a cause? No. He lost himself in wealth and debauchery. Do you think he believes in what you do? This man, this kingdom, he believes in nothing.
Kingdom's the name of the mummy faction, by the way.
As his memories of being alive. Such a waste of immortality. Aten sends me dreams of Tokyo, the beautiful madness. He whispers that it can happen again, and he shows me the way. But the first time, the beginning. Ask your friend. Ask him why the children of Tokyo lie broken in the streets. You cannot be killed, but my men will harry you across this earth. Run back to your friend. You cannot stop me.
Forgot a period there. Copy editing team missed a trick. Yeah, long story short, a lot of Aryan missionaries ended up heading up north among the German peoples up there. They converted a lot of tribes as they came into the empire. Like if you've heard of the Goths, if you've heard of, and if you've heard of the Vandals, who took over North Africa, and also wrecked Rome, where the word comes from. Though they were Aryans until their peoples were absorbed by the people they conquered. They were Aryan Christians who ruled Nicaean Christians, and it became basically barbarian Christianity. A lot of people treated it like intermediate Christianity during the conversion process. And Clovis, the king of the Franks, who started France and basically built the area, was famous for converting straight from paganism to Catholicism, to like Trinitarian Christianity, which basically nobody else did unless they were like local kings all the way up in England or something. So it ended up being a big political factor in like instability in like before about 1000 AD-ish, when the last traces of Arianism finally just were completely wiped out.
And here's one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire game, because we've gone through all of this to find this thingamajig this dude wants. And then we get this cutscene.
Oh, nice. This is nice. Well, it's a forgery, but it's a decent one. Don't worry.
I had to time travel to get that.
While you were gone, I confirmed the bad news. They've gotten hold of a second Class 1 device, meaning a second Tokyo may be imminent. Tokyo. Now there's something I'd like to wipe off my resume. I suppose the only way to do that is to keep it from happening again. Now, you're familiar with how these destructive wonders work, yes? You have these sources of Third Age power, remarkable things, and then you have these equally remarkable arcs that were designed to secure them. It's that simple. Container, contained. They were meant for each other. Well, apparently not everyone sees it that way. They're preparing to move the device out of Almarea's Sans Arc. Oh, sure. I see the reasoning. Why bother securing something incredibly unstable if you can twirl it around and risk all of Egypt instead? They've got a ship waiting for them in Cairo. I'll find out where they are and keep them there. You poke around with the locals and see if you can dig up an arc. What a team we make.
And that's about it. Next time we will be going back in time again and meeting someone earlier in their life. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.